Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Now today is going to be more relaxed. Today hopefully won't be like drinking from a fire hose. That was the big push yesterday. Now we're kind of gonna loaf our way through today. Now you've seen the theory. Now we're going to be talking about application of that theory. What do we do with that theory? And we're going to be talking about accessing the larger consciousness system, what you'll find, what to expect, how it works, something about the experience, and then toward the end of the day, we'll do another one of those experiential exercises. We'll do a little more healing and some more remote viewing. And then we should have lots of time for questions. Okay, the question, can everybody do it? Can anybody learn to experience and become operational in the non-physical reality? Okay, and the answer is yes, of course. Anybody can do it. All of you are consciousness. Okay? It's inherent in the kind of being that you are, that this is all available to you. But that's like saying anybody can learn to play the piano. See? Can you learn to play the piano? Of course you can. But how many of you can play the piano? How many of you do? And how many of you are good at it? You see, it's the same sort of thing. It takes practice. First you have to have an interest, and you have to have the desire, then you have to have the time and energy and inclination to sit down and do it. And just like playing that piano or violin or you know, being a good athlete or anything else that you do, it takes, you start at the beginning and you're not really very good at it. And then you keep working at it, and over years you get better. You have to take the long view on doing these sorts of things. The thing that creates the problem for most people is they say, oh, that's neat. I'd like to go out of body, or I'd like to learn how to heal. And then they try it 2 or 3 times, maybe even a week. And if they're really, really interested, maybe even a month, and then they say, oh, it doesn't work. It doesn't work for me, and then they're done. Can you imagine somebody learning to play the violin or the piano, or to become a world-class soccer player saying, well, I went out, I got a soccer ball, I kicked it around for a couple of weeks, and I went out then on the Olympic team, and it just wasn't for me. I couldn't do it. Well, of course not. It's the same sort of thing. So if you're really interested in this, you need to take the long view. You need to take the view that this is a lifetime of learning. This is something that you don't just work out for a little bit and then it's done. Okay? It's not like, sometimes people think like going to the larger reality, doing an out of body. It's like going to Texas or going to New York. You ought to be able to just do it, just go there. It's like it's a place. It's like going to the park, but it's not that way. And again, should becoming operational in the non-physical reality be a main goal? No, I don't think it ought to be a main goal. I think it ought to be a secondary goal. I think your main goal ought to be to increase the quality of your consciousness, to grow up, lower your entropy. That's the main goal. That's really what we're here for. The main goal isn't to go explore the larger consciousness system. And I think if that is the main goal, you'll end up being very frustrated. Okay, that needs to be more of a side issue. The main goal is growing up, evolving. That's why you're here, is to evolve your consciousness. And the more that you evolve and become that loving consciousness, the more open you are and the easier it is for you to access other states of consciousness, to access the larger consciousness system. So trying to make that your main goal and force that first is getting the cart in front of the horse, for the most part. Not that it can't be done that way. It can, but it's a lot harder. And I suspect if you get the cart in front of the horse, that'll work too. If you put the horse behind and push the cart, it's just not efficient. You can finally get to town that way, but it's not the best way to do it. All right, how do you go about learning to experience and become operational in non-physical reality? Are there any exercises or any way I recommend to help you develop that awareness? Well, you need to start with meditation. That's where everybody starts. Now, there's at least 100 different ways to meditate. People meditate with breath. They take the conscious to the breath. They meditate with visual things, where they maybe look at a mandala, or it used to be look at a candle, a candle flame, or whatever. There's ways to meditate with technology, binaural beats. Binaural beats are the active ingredient in hemisync. Many of you are connected with the Monroe Institute, and those will help you meditate. They're a training aid to meditation. In other words, they help you get to that very productive altered state more easily, but they are just training wheels. Think of well, even meditation itself in a way you can think of that, but the aids to meditation, and there's lots of aids to meditation. In the beginning, one aid to meditation is a quiet room. Close your eyes, no disturbance. Turn off the phone. That can be an aid to meditation. The hemisync sounds, or just you can go, hemisync can be expensive, and I get questions a lot from students and other people that just don't have much disposable income. They can't pay hundreds of dollars for something. They're just barely squeaking by as it is. And they want to know, what can I do? And I say, well, just go to go to Google. Google binaural beat, B-I-N-A-U-R-A-L. Google binaural beat, and you will find lots of binaural beat generators that are for free. And you can go to any of those sites and you can generate a binaural beat that suits you. Well, again, binaural beat is pretty much the active ingredient in more sophisticated sounds like hemisync, and there's other competitors there, but the active ingredient is mostly the binaural beat. So you can get that binaural beat without all the frills, and it'll work well for you, work just as well. So now how are you going to make this binaural beat? Well, go to that site and you'll find that, first I guess I should tell you, what is a binaural beat? Okay, a binaural beat is you put a pure tone, a pure acoustic tone. That means a frequency, okay, a sound. Take one pure tone, and this has to be in stereo, and you feed that one tone into this ear. Then you take another pure tone and feed it into this ear. Now if the pure tones have exactly the same frequency, all you hear is that tone. But if the tones are off a little bit by a certain amount of frequency, let's say 4 hertz. 4 hertz is a cycle per second. That's how we measure frequency. So let's say you put one tone in this ear that is 1,000 hertz. You put one in this ear that's 1,004 hertz. Then you won't notice the difference between 1,000 and 1,004. They will sound about the same to you. You're not that accurate at your hearing. But what will happen is that those two tones go into your central nervous system through their paths. When they get to the corpus callosum, which is the membrane between the brain hemispheres, they mix. And when they mix, you get a beat frequency, which is equal to the difference between the two frequencies. So in this case, you'd get a 4 hertz beat frequency. Now that you can hear. 4 hertz is 4 beats a second. That would be like bump, 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 bump. That's about 4 bumps every second. You see? You'd hear that going on in your head. Well, it's not coming acoustically through your ears. It's not actually being bone connection, through your body. That's actually being mixed in your central nervous system at the corpus callosum. That's where it's being mixed. And when that happens, those beats tend to entrain your brain waves. Okay, so you are putting out electrical energy all the time with your brain, and that's called brain waves. And when you go for your physical and the doctor puts those electrodes on your skull, what he's doing is taking an EEG that is picking up those electrical signals. And those electrical signals have energy in different frequencies. And we break these frequencies up into categories that we name. The ones that are probably most common names are the beta state, that should be where we are now, right? The alpha state, which is in around 10 hertz, 10 cycles per second, that's the next lower. That's where you are when you're just nice and relaxed and mellow. Then there's the theta state, which is that state that you get in It's often called a hypnagogic state before you go to, just before you go to sleep, you sometimes see images and things. Theta state lurks right there, and that's in and around the 4 hertz. You see that 4 hertz is in the theta state. And then you get down a little lower than that into the, say 2 hertz, whatever, and then you're in delta. That's the kind of brain waves that dominate when you are unconscious, fast asleep. Okay. Now when I say that you have these various brain waves, say delta when you're asleep. When you're sleeping, you don't just have delta, okay? You don't just have alpha or just have theta. Usually it's a mixture of all of them going on all the time. But you're dominant in, say now, you should be dominant in beta. Beta ought to be where most of your energy is. When we start doing those exercises, and you close your eyes and you start following what I'm telling you and whatever, beta will go away from its dominance and you will be dominant in probably alpha and or theta. And probably the more successful you are, you'll be more dominant in theta, you see. So one of the ways you can train this is get one of these little biofeedback devices, hook it up to your scalp, and it'll make different noises with the different dominance in the brainwave, and you can just use a biofeedback to train yourself to produce more theta. Theta is the state where most of the action takes place. That's really the place where you want most of your energy to be while you're doing this meditation. That's the state that dominates when you're in this point consciousness state. And the more of your energy you get into that, then generally the more successful you are. In other words, you'll have some beta, some theta, some delta, some alpha, all the time. You have all of these players. But you get to the point where you're like 99% of your brainwave energy is in a 3.8 to 4 hertz theta state. Then that's generally the kind of EEG pattern you get when you're at the point consciousness level. So that's kind of where we're going technically, all right? And the binaural beats will help you do that. Now, how do you generate these? How should you generate a custom fit binaural beat? Go to this site, and what they will allow you to do is pick your start frequency. We call that the base frequency. That's when I gave my example of 1,000 and 1,004, the base frequency would be the 1,000. We could have just as easily done a 100 and a 104. It would have been a lower tone. Or we could have done a 5,000 and 5,004. All of them will get you a beat frequency of 4 hertz, which will drive you into a theta state. Okay, all of those would do that. Now, so which one should you pick? Well, it's individual. The research we did at Monroe Laboratories, we found out that the ladies liked a little higher frequency. They often would be in the 5,000, 5,004 range. The 1,000, up in that, sometimes in the 500s was good. The men tend to like a lower beat. Often the males liked the 100, 104. So you just experiment. This has to be an experiment. It's about you. Get something that fits you, that just kind of works for you. Now the next thing that you can do in those sites is you can say, well, okay, we can make those pure tones, and you can make a tape. You can make an MP3 from these sites. It'll just make put it on a CD or put it on a tape, and you can ramp the frequencies up or down. And the theory behind that is that you're starting in a beta state. So if you have a problem getting into this theta state with a 4 hertz, if that's too much of a shock to your system, then you start with beta. So let's say beta is going to be, let's say 15, 20, something like that, wherever suits you, hertz. So then you could have, let's say 100 and 120, okay? And then you let that run for 2 minutes. And then you have 100 and 118. Let that run for 2 minutes. And then you have 100 and 114. Let that run. You see what I mean? And you step yourself down until you get down to 100 and 104, which is where you want to be. And it's not exactly 4. When I say 4, it's in and around about 4. Actually, it seems to be just slightly less than 4. And a lot of them will give you very fine control. You can dial up at 3.875 if you want. The software is generally pretty good. Experiment. Do you need this ramp? to slowly get you down? Well, some people do. If you don't, you're just wasting that much time. Eventually, you will find that you don't need the ramp. If you needed it in the beginning, after you get more accustomed to it, you don't need it. Then you can shorten the ramp. And then after that, you can do away with the ramp. Okay? So there's all sorts of experiments you need to try. What's your best bass frequency? Do you need a ramp? If so, how long a ramp do you need? How quickly can you drop? Can you do it in just 3 steps, or does it take 10 steps? Now, you get down then into your 4 hertz, and you play that for as long as you want meditation. Let's say you want this to be an hour long or a half hour long, then you let that run for a half hour. And then if you like, step it up. You go from the 4 hertz to maybe 6, to maybe 10, to maybe 12, to maybe 14, and till you feel like you're kind of awake again, and that'll slowly bring you back up. And after a while, and that'll be nice. That slow coming back will be kind of nice. It won't jar you. You'll feel probably a little more refreshed and a little better if you come up slowly like that. But eventually it won't make any difference. You can get rid of that. You can just, end your tape. It's done. You wake up, you adjust, because you get used to it, and it's not you don't have the big reorientation problem of suddenly you're in this reality, suddenly you're in that reality, and it's a shock to your system. You get used to it, and you can drop that ramp off too. So you might start with that ramp being longer and slower, and then cut it down and eventually get rid of it. Okay, so we have all these things to experiment with. Now, what about experimentation? You see, now this is all free. You're just downloading this on the internet, and it'll work real well for you. So what about this experimentation? What do? Do you sit there with your headset on your computer and say, well, that's 100 hertz. I think a little higher than that. Let me try a few things. Oh, this sounds about right. So that within a half an hour, you've decided what's best for you? That doesn't work really very well. That's a good way to start, perhaps, but it's not a good way to end up. What you need to do is you need to spend about at least 3 weeks doing this at least once a day before you'll have any idea what works for you or what doesn't. It's not the kind of thing you can just listen to and say, oh, this will be best for me. So listen to all of them, pick one that you like, start with that. Use it for about 3 weeks or a month. Get used to it. Get familiar with it. Get it to where it's easy and comfortable, and then do something different. Change it. Say, all right, I started. Let's say we'll start in the middle between 500 and 100. We'll start at maybe 250 or 300. Maybe we'll start there. That sounds good. And then the next time, go up to 500. Then go up to 1,000. Try 5,000. Try 100. Try 50. Try whatever suits you. But each time you try something different, spend 3 weeks at least, or a month, or 2 months, listening to that, unless it just irritates you. If you've got one and you say, oh, I just can't stand listening to that. Well, don't listen to that for 3 weeks. That's never going to really be good for you, But if it doesn't irritate you, then listen to it for 3 weeks, a month, a couple of months. Work on it, meditate. And then after you've done that, go back to the go back to the one you just left and say, well, how's that different than this one? And work that for a while. And then go back to the next one, and then pick a third one on the other side. You see, this might take you 6 months. It may take you a year just to find your bass frequency. Fiddle around with that 4 hertz, make it 3.8, make it 3.75, make it 3.99, make it 4.2, whatever. We're all different. We're all human beings, and we're all unique, and we're all different. Find what works for you. You see, now this is customized binaural beat. So when you start this process, figure it may take you 6 months before you really end up with a sound that works well for you. The good news is that you can find a sound that'll work better than the others. That is good for you. The bad news is that it probably won't stay that way for a real long time. So when you find this one that's good for you, use it. Use it for a year. Use it for a year and a half, and then you need to go back and experiment, because by then you've changed. You're not the same anymore. What works for you is going to be different. You might want to lower that bass frequency a little, or raise it, or change the beat. So now, after a year or so of using something that really works for you, go back and experiment again. But now the experiment can be faster because now you're really acclimated. Now, if you listen to it for, say, 4 or 5 times, you'll know whether it's better or worse. You don't have to listen to it for 3 weeks because you're accustomed to it, you know. Now, those of you who've been listening to HemiSync for years, you know, you'll be a fast start on this. You won't take you so long. You'll be able to know. But anything that's different takes getting used to. And often you don't know that something that's different is going to be better. That being better gets masked by the fact that it's different and you're not used to it. So that's why you have to take your time. So that is a good aid for putting yourself in a theta state. Now that I've told you how to do that, and that it's free of charge, and that it's actually more work than you thought, because it's going to take you more time, I should also tell you that eventually you want to take the headphones off. Eventually you want to let all that go. And the reason for that is these are training wheels. Okay, the binaural beats are training wheels. It's like when you're 5 years old or 6 years old and you get that first bike, and if you get on the bike and nobody holds you up, you fall over, right? You crash. It's a bad experience. So in order to keep children from having that bad experience that makes them afraid to get back on a bike, we put training wheels on it. And those training wheels keep them up. But the training wheels kind of let it, you know, you can ride it right in the middle and neither training wheel touches, right? And that's why they're training wheels. It helps the child get their balance. Well, that's what these are. These are training wheels for your ability to control your consciousness with your intent. Training wheels. And it's at that same level as the 5 or 6 year old riding the bike. So eventually you want to be able to wean yourself off of the training wheels. You ought to be able to just go there. And it should take you somewhere between 2 and 3 seconds. You can just, you're in that state. You can go from sitting here to being point consciousness in 2 seconds, and you can do it while you talk to somebody and have a conversation. You see, that's where you want to go. Now there's some difficulty in doing that right away, but that's where you can go. You can just change your consciousness. You can get into that state. You can connect to this data stream or that data stream. You can go into this reality. You can go out of body. You can do all these things, and you can do it whenever you want to, and it's casual. It's easy. Okay, so that's really where you want to go. And if you stay plugged in, then you become dependent on those training wheels, and you can't get any further than what you can get there. Well, a little story about what the downside of that is that about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, I was on the board of directors at the Barone Institute, so I came back for board of director meetings every so often. And this is after I'd moved to Alabama. And one time when I went back there for the meeting, Skip, who was the director of technology or whatever then, he got a hold of me, and I hadn't been there for a while. It had probably been 5 or 6 years since I'd been there, and Skip got a hold of me and he says, I got this great new sound I want you to hear. I want you to tell me what this is like. Come in here and get in this booth. I want to play this for you. It's our new thing. We think it's really great. So I said, okay, and I laid down the booth and they played the new sound, and instantly, okay, I was there. This was not voiced or anything. This was just the sound. And okay, I was there, and I listened to that, and he said, well, how do you like that? And I said, well, it's very nice. I like the sound. It's very pleasant, and it takes you right to that theta state very quickly and locks you in there. And then Skip said, well, he says, I've got this issue, kind of a personal problem, something that I'm struggling with now that I really could use some help with. And he explained it to me, and he said, I appreciate it if you could, kind of get out and help me with that. And I said, okay, no problem. And then I started to take off and go and do my thing and help him out. And I found out that sound he was playing was just like an anchor. That sound had taken me to this place, and it held me in that place. It takes you there and holds you there. So as much as it was a boost to get you there, it was a trap to hold you there. So as I would start to go out and pull me right back to that nice, pleasant place. It was just like a big elastic band. And so I said, Skip, could you turn that off and just give me some pink noise? Just turn that off. And as soon as he did, anchor chain was gone, you see. And then I was able to go do the things that I needed to do for Skip. So that's when I first realized that, oh, there's a limitation here. So there's an advantage and there's a limitation. So you want to get to the point that you can get to this point consciousness state pretty much when you want to, on your own, without any aids, and you'll be able to keep on progressing and go on and on past that point. Okay, so they're training wheels. Wonderful devices, Most 5-year-olds would have a terrible time riding a bike if they didn't have training wheels. That means their father would have to run along beside them, holding the bike up by the back of the seat. That's how I did it with my son. Didn't have training wheels. But it's a lot easier to start with some help, but then wean yourself off the help and get independent so you can do it on your own. Now that may be 5 years later, you see. That may not be in a month, in a week. Don't push yourself too hard. Take your time. Okay, so that's how do you get there? Well, that's one path that you can use to get there. Now, you don't need something like binaural beats to help you, perhaps, if you work at it. I mean, people have been meditating for, 4,000 years, right? And probably longer than that. That's all the records we have. And they've been very successful at it, and they didn't have any binaural beats. Well, sometimes they did. If you go to some of the kind of native shaman things, they do have binaural beats. They have those drums and they beat, and guess what? If you count, they have a certain number, 100, or I think it's whatever it is, beats per minute is their optimal thing. That turns out to be exactly 4 beats a second. That's right there in that 4 hertz, you see. So they did have it, but it wasn't binaural. It wasn't one in either ear, so they weren't getting the mixing. But even without the mixing, that still helps encourage that theta state. You see, so some of them did have technology that helped them. It just wasn't electronic technology. And the same with the visuals. You can look through things and you can move your eyes around things. And if you do it at just the right thing, you're sending optical pulses at a 4 hertz rate, you see. So there's lots of ways that flame flickers at about that 4 hertz rate, you see. So there's lots of things that can help induce this that people have found, but it's always about the same thing. These are things that help you find a theta state. A biofeedback device will help you too. We've just gotten higher tech devices now. Certain music, some of this meditation music that you hear, certain bands kind of have this groove that they get into, and a lot of people find it like dreamy, music. Well, if you look at that, you'll find that there's an awful lot. If you do a spectral analysis of the audio sound that they have, you'll find a lot of that energy that's in that acoustic signal falls down in the theta region. Okay. Now they're doing all kinds of other things, and they have melody and whatever, but that's just in their music because that's the tempo, that's the way they play. So yes, there's lots of technology, but it mostly centers around helping you maintain and get into a theta state. Okay, so that's kind of the, how do you get there? Start with meditation. People meditate by just concentrating on their breath. They just keep track of their breathing. Just become aware of how you breathe. That's one way to meditate. Why does that work? How does that work? That works by giving you something to do with your mind that's non-functional. It doesn't take a lot of analysis to be aware of your breathing. So you shut that analytical chatter down. You shut that monkey mind down with all the jabber. That's what meditation's point is. The point of meditation is to quiet your mind to where you have no thoughts, none of the jabber. Your intellect sits down and shuts up. That's what you want. You want that intellect to kind of go away. Stop all the chatter. Stop thinking all those thoughts. Have a blank mind where you're just existence. You just exist. And we call that existing in the void. And most people, when they start meditation, they can exist in the void for about 3 seconds, and then stuff comes in. Eventually you'll get that up to 3 minutes, and then stuff comes in. But you need to be able to get that up to pretty much indefinitely. You need to be able to get in that void, just stay there for an hour, 2 hours if you want. It's just a state that you can go to, and it's stable, you see. So now here's the point of the meditation. Get to that void state, get rid of all the thoughts that keep intruding, get rid of all the chatter that's going on, and just stay that way, stable. So you can stay that way as long as you want to. When a thought comes in, just don't be upset, just say, okay, go away, I'm not here, I'm not paying attention, I'm not interested. Another way people learn to meditate is with a mantra. A mantra is just a sound. It is like the breath. It's a sound that doesn't mean anything. Okay, I will give you a mantra that you can use. Sering, sering. You can just say that. That's a mantra that you can use. Spell it any way you want. It's a sound, not a word. Now, how does that work? Well, it's got a couple of things about it that help its work. One, it doesn't mean anything, so it's just filling your mind full of nonsense. It's filling your mind, it's like cotton candy in your brain, right? It's just, it's non-operable. There's nothing that you can do with that sound. It's not something you analyze, it's just there. And because you're filling your mind with that, because you keep saying that over and over in your mind, that pushes other thoughts away. Your mind's busy. So all we're doing is filling the mind full of fluff, like I'm breathing. I can feel the air coming in. I can feel the air going out, or sering, the sound. And it's just filling your head full of something that's non-operative, pushes the thoughts out. And as soon as you stop saying that mantra, all the thoughts come back in again, you see. Well, you need to get to the point where you let the mantra go. Then you need to get to the point where you let the meditation go. You don't need to sit down and say a mantra to meditate. You don't need to do any sort of formal meditation. You can just be in that theta state because you want to be there. You don't need to really, do you meditate? Well, sort of. I meditate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I'm in and out of the state all the time. But no, I don't sit down and take a time to meditate. You see, you don't need to do that. So meditation is just a tool. Don't make it an endpoint. It's just a tool. Eventually you outgrow the tool. So we just want to control our mind. We cannot get control over our awareness until we can get all the junk out of the way. Okay, so that's the first bunch of junk that we have to get out of the way is just chatter. You close your eyes and you try to relax, and suddenly you're thinking, what time is it? Where do I have to be? Do I have to make dinner tonight? Who am I going to meet? Do I have my homework done? And all this stuff is going on, and your mind drifts off to something else that's going on in your life, and your mind's busy. That's what you have to get rid of. Okay, that's maybe more than you wanted to know, but hopefully that'll give you some information, some data about how to go about this entry into observing and being a part of the larger consciousness system. If you have a technique that you use for meditation, some special kind of technique, some special kind of ritual that you go through, place, trappings, sitting up, lying down, whatever, go ahead and use those rituals, but realize that they're all just rituals. They're all just habits. You don't really need you don't really need incense to meditate. You don't really need even a quiet place to meditate. You don't really need to be lying down to meditate. You don't really need to be sitting up to meditate. In fact, as you get good at doing one sort of meditation, and it's good at the beginning, it's easier if you always kind of do it the same way. Like if you sit in a chair and meditate, then just sit in a chair and meditate all the time for a while. But what will happen is that if you sit in a chair and learn to meditate, and then you meditate sitting in a chair, you will find that if somebody says, well, here, lie down and meditate, you won't be able to do it. You'll lie down and it just doesn't feel right. Say, no, it just doesn't work for me lying down. I got to sit up in a chair to meditate. Well, that's because sitting in the chair has become part of your ritual. It's an unnecessary tool that you've used. And what you would like to do over time is to get rid of as many of these tools because they're just cumbersome. I mean, they can be nice. They can actually give you something special. You know, if you have a very special place and very special things, it's nice to do that. I'm not saying that the rituals, you know, are evil and should be gotten rid of. You know, they're not bad. They can be very pleasant, and they can give you some special connections through your rituals that you associate. You associate certain things, certain connections with those rituals, and that's nice too. I'm just saying it's unnecessary. Not that there's anything wrong with it. And you should be able to evolve those situations and those processes that are most efficient for you. And sometimes when you have the time and it's leisurely, well then do the whole thing, you know, do the whole ritual. Other times when it's not convenient, then you don't have to. So you don't have to throw the ritual away. You just realize that there's a bigger, you know, there's a bigger picture. You don't have to have it. Use it. You maybe can make those same connections other ways. It would be good for you. You can learn to multi-process. So eventually you want to be able to be in more than one reality frame at the same time. So you want to be able to be in multiple frames. You want to be able to be having a conversation here with someone, driving your car, doing something that you need to pay attention to, and also be in other reality frames doing things that you need to be doing there as well. There's no reason that you can't parallel process with a little practice. The way you get that practice is to first break all of your habits. Okay, that's how you get that practice. You break your habits. So if you've always meditated sitting in a chair, lie down and meditate. It will be impossible the first 5 or 6, 7 times you try it, and then maybe the 8th time it'll work just a little bit, and the 9th time it'll work a little more. Eventually, you can meditate just as well lying down as you can sitting up, but it doesn't matter. Okay, then learn to meditate standing up. Then learn to meditate while you walk around. Then learn to meditate, you know, while you're fixing dinner, washing the dishes, doing the housework. You see, just keep pushing the envelope to where meditation becomes more and more natural, less and less formal, if I will, less and less structured, less and less tied up with your rituals. Because when you can do that, then it starts to become not this long process, but just click, you're there. You're just switching your data stream to a different reality, and you can have 2 data streams going, you see. Now, don't do something, you know, don't be a tightrope walker at 800 feet above the ground between 2 buildings and meditate, you know, not a good idea. Sometimes you just have to focus where you are. And that's true in other realities too. Sometimes you don't want to be partially here and partially there. You need to be there completely. You need to be in that other reality frame 100%. And here you're just, nobody's home. You know, you're not here at all. And sometimes you need to be in this reality 100% focused. But not always. There's lots of things. You know, walk in the park, you don't have to be here 100%. And it's nice to come here, be 100%, enjoy the squirrels, the trees, and the grass, but then you can drift off for a few seconds, and then you come back, and you can basically timeshare reality frames to where you're popping in and out, and get by reasonably well. But anyway, these are skills that are all learnable. You just have to practice them. Okay, then after you learn to meditate walking around, learn to meditate standing on 1 foot. Learn to meditate in a crowd. Learn to meditate while you're sitting on a bus full of school children. You know, learn to be able to do this in basically any environment that you're in. And what that'll do is every time you try a new environment, a new position, if you will, it will be difficult. It won't quite work right, but just stick with it. It'll come back. So it may take you 3 months to go from sitting to lying, or from lying to sitting, or to walking. Every time you make a change, you may work at it for 3 or 4 months. You see, before you get to where it feels sort of natural now on the bus with those school children. But after years, if you do, again, you need a long-term view. Think of 5 years from now. Think of 10 years from now, where you want it to be. That's how you have to keep working. This idea that if it doesn't, if in 2 weeks, you haven't figured it all out and you're not good at it, I can't do this. It just doesn't work for me. That's like, taking one piano lesson, and if you can't play Beethoven, you're going to quit. Okay, so that's about question, how. How do you get there? And what do you do when you're there? And how do you build up this ability to control your consciousness and the data stream that you're hooked to? All right. Here's another topic that we should probably talk about. These are all very basic things. We're talking about the most basic things about the larger reality and how to interface and how to access it. Here's another basic thing. How can you tell the difference between what you imagine and what comes from you, from the outside? Okay, and people are very concerned about that because they see things or whatever, but they don't know, did I just make that up or is that outside of me? Well, in the beginning, when you first get those sorts of things, when you're kind of new at this, particularly if you still have your training wheels on, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to tell. Because data's data. Whether you create the data or whether the data comes from someplace else, it's data. And you deal with it the same way. Okay, so how do you tell? Well, there's a few ways. And there's one way that's probably the best, but I will talk about a few ways. One way is when you get data that isn't you, it's just not a thought that you would have. It's just not the kind of information, that comes to you, You don't know anything and have no interest whatsoever in airplanes. And suddenly you get all this data, that has to do with, how the wings are attached or something, and that's not me, right? I don't think about those things. And you get data that is just outside of you and it feels foreign to you. That's one way that you'll get data that isn't yours. Okay, but that's not proof. Well, there is no objective proof because this is all a subjective exercise, right? So the best way to tell is to have patience. Have patience. You have to work with this. If you get out into the out of body, or you get into an altered state, and you get some voice comes up to you and it talks to you, and you strike up this conversation, and maybe it's interesting, maybe you ask it some questions, and then later you say, was that real? Or did I make that up? Well, you don't know. Remember we talked about being open-minded but skeptical and living gracefully with uncertainty? That's what you have to do. You have to not want to jump to a conclusion immediately. Should I believe that or should I not believe it? It's the wrong question. Just go with it. Just experiment with it. Go back and interact with that being again. Before you leave, say, hey, can we get in touch again? How should we arrange this? Is that okay? And then go back and again, and again, and again. And it's like anybody else. If you meet somebody on the street and they're a stranger, and you have a 10-minute conversation, do you know whether what they were telling you was a lie? Were they making it up? Were they just, you don't know, right? Well, it's the same way if you're in another reality system. You don't know whether that's you, whether, you don't know what's going on. But now after you've talked with somebody 6 or 7 or 8 times and you've been to their house and they've been to yours, you kind of know, right, where they're coming from. You know the credibility. You know what's happening in that conversation. You have a feel for that person. It's the same way in the larger conscious system. So you may need to have this conversation for 3 months. You may have to have 50 conversations with this being before you really get a good idea what's going on here. But eventually you will, because you'll ask questions, you'll get information. Does this information make sense? Is it information that is foreign to me? And can I apply it? Can I look it up? Is there some evidence in it? Does this person tell you that things are a certain way and then you find out that they are that way, or that they're not? You see, try to do things that are evidential. Get information that's evidential. And the question you really want to ask is, not should I believe it, but is this information useful? You see, that's the key. Is this information useful to me? Is this news I can use? That's the key. If it's not useful to you, if there's nothing you can do with it, it's just interesting perhaps, amuses you, you think it's cool, but how does it help you grow? How does it help you increase the quality of your consciousness? That's the key question. And if the answer is, well, it doesn't, well then, you know, if it's entertaining, then continue, but if it's not, go someplace else, because you're sort of wasting your time there. Now, if it does help you, if it's useful information, it helps you grow, it gives you insight into things, it helps you deal with your fear, it helps you see what your beliefs are, it somehow helps you grow, it gives you a bigger picture that enables you to deal more effectively with your understanding. You know, you're learning, you're growing, you're expanding your awareness. If you're doing that, terrific. Then it's useful. And at that point, does it matter what the source is? Doesn't matter, does it? It really doesn't matter what the source is. And on the other hand, if it's not giving you any of those things, if it's just data that is not useful, does it matter what the source is? No, not at all. You see, so the real question isn't, is that real? The real question is that useful? Okay, that's the key point. Now, you will get a sense of its realness or not, just because with familiarity, you'll get to know that being, and you'll get to know the information, and you'll get to know whether that information is coming from outside of you. Just like after you meet a person, you get to know whether they're telling you the truth or whether they're giving you a line or what, because you get to know them. And it's not because of a certain fact. If you say, well, here's somebody that you've spent weeks with, months with, somebody you've known for years, well, how do you know they're not lying to you? Well, you can't say, well, it's a fact, because if they were lying to me, their eyes would flutter. I mean, there's no facts. How do you know? Well, you can't really say how you know. You've had this association with them a long time, and you just know. You build up trust. You know their character. You know what makes them. Well, this is the same way. You have to get to know these entities that you're talking. They have to earn your trust. You have to earn their trust. And it develops into a relationship. And often it'll develop into a relationship that you'll keep for a long time. Right? You make friends, you keep friends. So don't look at it as just a kind of a gee whiz thing, what I did, and then you drop it and it's gone, like it'll never happen again. Look at it like it's a social connection. It's an interaction, and the key thing is it valuable? Okay, is it valuable? And if it is, it really doesn't matter. If you somehow can make up things that are really valuable to yourself, well, good. That's wonderful, isn't it? If you somehow get things from other entities someplace that are valuable to yourself, well, good. That's the point, is you're growing. You're growing up is the whole point. Okay, but we have that, because we live in an objective reality and we want everything to be objective, and it's not objective, then it's no good. You see, we get biased, and our first question is, can I believe that? Drop that, can I use that? That's what you take. Okay, so the way you tell the difference is with practice. You interact with that being, with that energy, with that information, with that data, until you can tell. It's always subjective. There is no way to tell objectively. You can always come up with an alternative explanation. You can always say, well, I talked to this entity and they gave me this historical account of a past life, and they said my name was George, and I did this and I did that, and then you can go back and look it up in the history book, and you say, oh, look, here was a guy, and he did that, and he lived in that time, and his name was George, and it's just like this, described, therefore it must be real. Well, must it be? couldn't you just have been pulling that out of a past memory or, whatever? Well, it doesn't matter, does it, where it comes from? You're pulling that out of the historical database. What's the difference? The historical database, characters in there, the larger consciousness system, a being that you see there really isn't any difference, all those things. It's just information. Live gracefully with uncertainty. Make the connections you can make. Gain what you can gain from them. And don't worry about the details. So the bottom line is experiment, experiment, experiment. Test, test, test. Gather evidence. And you must convince yourself of the utility of it. Otherwise, you're wasting your time. Okay, now when we're dealing with things more, what do we call them, more technical, more objective, then we can gather evidence, okay? Talking to other beings, it's hard to get evidence other than they tell you things that turn out to be true. But there's other things we can gather evidence with, and that's why in these experiential exercises I work on remote viewing and healing. Those things are easy to do. You can get evidence, and we did that yesterday, so you kind of know a way of doing that, and I'm sure many of you have your own ways of doing that you've been doing for years. You can get lots of evidence that way. If you go through these exercises, you will eventually get good enough at them. If you keep the statistics on it, you will find out that you are doing things that are pretty close to impossible to have done just by accident. So you heal one person. You say, all right, here's a person and they have a tumor and I'm going to heal them, and sure enough that tumor goes away and you go, aha, I did it. Well, maybe, maybe not. That tumor may have just gone away anyway. Tumors do that sometimes. You can't do it just once or just twice. You need to do it 100, 200, 300 times. And then if you say, all right, I've done this 300 times and 257 of them, the tumor went away. Well, you're doing something. You're really doing something, because it should have been out of that 300, it should have been 150 of them worked and 150 of them didn't work if it's just random guessing, right? If it's just whether or not it happens to happen or not. So you have to do it and do it and do it and collect the data until you've got enough data that you say, I'm being effective here. And with the remote viewing, it's the same thing. You need to find things to look at, places you've never been. What does the inside of this building look like? What are my friends doing tonight? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you need to just keep practicing at it and keep doing it. Eventually you'll get better at it, because eventually you'll get bored with it. And when you're bored with it, you'll stop trying to manipulate it and analyze it, and you'll just kind of do it, And then you'll get better at it. You'll say, oh yeah, I went there, I saw this, and then you'll call up those people and say, were you just, out in your backyard chasing your dog? And they say, yeah, the dog got out. Or they'll say, no, we were all sitting, watching TV, So you have to do this evidential data and see what and get better at it. But do this over years, not over weeks, not even over months. Take the long view till you get better at it. Get enough evidence that you are actually getting information outside of yourself that you can verify, evidence in this reality that you feel convinced that you are doing it, that you have, you're really making a connection, you're having an effect. Your mind is affecting that health. Your mind is able to get this data out of the databases. When we remote view, we're just getting data out of a database. So that's, you have to get evidence. You have to convince yourself. Now, after you convince yourself, I won't say that you're done, but you're probably close to being done, because you don't have to convince yourself over and over again, unless you're really hard-headed. Convince yourself, and then you will find that relaxation of just convincing yourself that you're no longer struggling with the is it real question, just that relaxation by itself will jump you ahead a step. Suddenly you will progress much more quickly for a while, because you're no longer struggling with this judgment and analysis. You'll just do better. Okay, and then enough things will just happen without you even trying to do experiments. Enough things will happen in your life day to day that will give you plenty of evidence. The evidence will just keep coming in, and you no longer have to go out and seek it out. It just happens, and your whole life is like that. All kinds of strange things happen to you, and it's just evidence keeps coming in. So that's the way that works. Okay, so what we want to do is get a clear, focused point consciousness, and we want to do that our focused intent has to be at the being level. Now, here's another thing that trips people up. When I tell you, get rid of the intellect, turn that intellect off, all the people who are left brain says, well, if I turn the intellect off, there's nothing left. If I turn the intellect off, I'm unconscious, right? That's the only way I can turn my intellect off. I'm unconscious. So I have to have an intellect, otherwise, how can I function? How can I heal? How can I do anything if if I don't have that intellect going? Well, you have to do all these things at the being level, not at the intellectual level. Okay. Now, when you're at that point consciousness, you have awareness at the being level, because that's all you are. You're at the same point that Descartes got to when he said, I think, therefore I am. Or as Beth always says, I am, therefore I think. Okay, when you're at that point consciousness place, you're just existing at the being level. You're aware that you exist. You are a point of consciousness. You have awareness. That's all at the being level. You're not doing this analysis. Now when you decide from that point is your launching place. That's like your doorway. So you go to that point consciousness, and now you can say, well, I want to go someplace, I want a remote view, I want to heal, I want to do other things. So let's say you go to heal. And you look and you say, here's my gingerbread shape, here's my humanoid shape, and I want to see the bad stuff, the unhealthy stuff is black, and you're saying, well, isn't that my intellect? No, that's you expressing your intent at the being level. Now, when you start saying, did I do that right? Was that really the health energy body? I couldn't get that, still that gingerbread thing keeps getting in and out, I can't keep it steady, you're doing all this analysis. That's your intellect. Okay, your intellect is always that little voice that's annoying. It's constantly judging, it's constantly complaining, it's constantly seeing what's wrong, it's constantly saying you're not doing it right, that's not clear enough, that gingerbread man only has one arm, it's constantly in there digging at it, fussing with it, trying to rearrange it, making judgments, doing analysis. That's your intellect. At the being level, you just exist. You still have an intent. I intend this, I intend that, and you do it. You're not judging it. You're not analyzing it. You're not critiquing it. You're not doing any of that stuff. You're being with it. It's just part of your existence. And now people say, okay, now I'm not confused about the intellect thing. I know about that, but what's this being level thing? Now you have to explain that. Well, that's a little harder to explain. You kind of have to be there, right? People who live out of their intellect have a hard time with the concept. People who are right-brained, they understand the being level. They have a hard time understanding, sequential logical process. That drives them nuts. The right-brained people live a lot of their life at the being level. What you see is what you get most of the time with such people. It's not until they drop into the intellectual mode that they become cagey, and manipulative and that sort of thing. At the being level, it's just you are. So those of you who are very intellectual will maybe have a struggle finding that point, because you've defined yourself as your intellect. That's how you define you. And it's hard now finding you outside of your, beyond your intellect. So you just have to work on that. Okay, approach to meditation. I think we've been through this, but let me hit these things. Fear nothing, hope for nothing, no thinking, no analysis, expect nothing, eliminate beliefs, don't compare, don't judge. What is all this about? This is all about what not to do. You see? It's all about what not to do. Meditation, being aware of your consciousness, is as more natural than breathing. Okay? What you have to do is get out of the way of it. It's not that you have to do something special to meditate. What you have to do is to get yourself out of the way of letting yourself be in that larger aware space. That larger aware space is just natural to you. That's where you should live all the time. So it's all about what you have to stop doing, right? So meditation is about not doing. It's not about doing. It's not another technique to learn with your intellect to force yourself to be in a meditation state. That's not it. It's about getting rid of all the stuff that keeps you out of that awareness, keeps you out of that meditation state. That meditation state's just you. That's just your consciousness. That's where you live. That's where you belong. And all you have to do is get out of the way, and you can be there. But these are the important clues. Fear nothing. Fear will keep you out of the larger reality probably more than anything else. Fear nothing. So you jump into that out-of-body state, or you get out in another reality, and the first thing you see is a big monster with fangs, right? And it's going to eat you. Okay, fear nothing. Say hello to him, ask him how his day's been going, send him a little love, and then go on about your business. The fear is there for a reason. The reason is you're fearful. It's you. The fear is inside of you, and you express it. You see it. It comes out. In an out-of-body reality frame, or in a larger consciousness frame, often what you see is what you are. So if you are fearful, you will find fearful things there. Okay. So first you have to get rid of the fear. Another way that fear is used is because that's true, that what you see is what you are. You see a lot of your fear. You run into it. But here you can sweep it under the rug. Here you can ignore it. Here you can just let it make knots on your back and in your neck and give you stress and tension, but not have to actually deal with it, because we're good at pushing things out of our intellect, right? But there you can't, because when you're there, you act at the being level. You are who you are. And if you have that fear, there it is. It's right up front and in your face in something you have to deal with. So if you have a lot of fear, every time you get into this larger reality system, you end up with problems if you're just kind of there on your own. Now, if you get there through a structured thing, like if you get there because you listen to this tape and it takes you to this place and this place and you see this thing, then you probably won't have to, because you've got this buttoned-down structure. I'm talking about you just get into it unstructured, on your own. There you are. Okay, so get rid of your fear. The second thing about fear is that because fear will be such a problem for you if you get into these reality frames, often you will be given tests, fear tests, if you will, to see if you're ready to get into this system. Because you don't want to be wandering around in places that you're not ready to be in. You just end up, see, fear can get into a bad cycle. Because you feared something, then you'll be looking for it next time. In other words, your fear will grow. And that fear can just spiral into the point where you're terrified and can't do anything. You just get so wadded up with your fear now that it's a big problem in your life. So, that's a de-evolutionary process with all that fear. You start going backwards. You start to lose sight of the love and the hope and the joy, and all that stuff starts to disappear because you're consumed with so much fear. So you have to let that fear go, and these places will put you nose to nose with your fear. So if you're not ready for these places, you shouldn't go there until you're ready. So if you want to go there, but you have problems, well, first thing you should do is get ready, right? Learn how to get ready to go there. How do you get ready? Get rid of that ego. Get rid of that fear. Get rid of those expectations. Get rid of those beliefs. Get rid of all that stuff. And when you offload all that stuff, now you're ready. And now the trip will be much easier. So the system will sometimes test your fear to see whether or not you're ready. And if you're not ready, they'll just chase you back out of that system. So people get out of body. I had one person said, he says, I can get out of body, but every time I do, these two guys come up and they beat me up. Push me back into my body. And he said, it happens all the time. He says, what is it? Is this place that violent, that if you show up, some thugs come around and beat you up? And I said, well, that's your fear. You know, that's your fear that you're dealing with. I said, you need to let go of that fear. And you need to interact with those two guys, and you need to not fight with them. You need to have an interaction. You need to not deal with them with fear. Okay, because as soon as you see them coming, you know, your fear blossoms. And that's why they keep coming. If when you see them, your fear doesn't blossom, then, okay, you passed that test. They can disappear. They can go home, you see. So it's just, if you think of it, it's like the guard at the door. You can't pass because you don't qualify. You have too much fear. So that happens a lot for individuals getting into the larger consciousness system. They run into all this scary stuff. And the scary stuff is often just given to them. You know, what a nice gift, right? You get a monster with fangs. It's given to you just to see how you react to it. If you're fearful, then you're not ready. And you'll have all sorts of fear. A lot of your dreams tend to be fear tests, because remember we said fear is the opposite of love? Fear is what de-evolves you. Love is what evolves you. So getting rid of fear is a real core thing as far as growing up. That's a real core thing. So a lot of your dreaming has to do with helping you get rid of fear. You get put into situations where you have a lot of anxiety, where things aren't going right, where nobody will listen to you, where you know, there's monsters or people are chasing you. It's all fear stuff. It's all to help you. You're practicing learning to deal with fear. So while you're dreaming, most of us spend probably about 50% of our dreams we're in fear, you know, we're in fear 101, right? And we get these scary things and issues, things that make us feel bad, make us feel unloved, make us feel unwanted, people don't treat us well. Well, all that's fear. You know, ego is a subset of fear. You know, we have all these problems, emotional problems. Fear isn't just monsters with fangs. You know, fear is people don't like you. Well, that's a fear. You're not competent. You're not up to the task. You fail to deliver. You know, all these things are fears. This is what a lot of your dreams are about. Lessons. Okay, so that's don't do. What you don't do in order to allow yourself to be who you are. That's meditation. All right, now what are the experiences that we can get into? Well, there's out of body. And you know, this is always a little joke I like to say, that, you know, there's an OOBE, which is an out-of-body experience, but that is really an unfortunate misnomer, because you're not getting out of your body. See, the whole concept of out of your body is body-centered, right? I have this body. My consciousness is in my body. Your consciousness is in your body. You don't even have a body. This is a virtual body. You're just consciousness. But you think, I'm a body, my consciousness is in my body, and I got to get my consciousness out of my body. Okay, where is your consciousness? Oh, it lives in my brain. You know, there's a little house, it has a little house in there, right? Little kitchen, you know, nice little living room, big TV. And the consciousness lives in there, and it has to get out of my body. Well, why is it that people end up in what Bob Monroe called locale one, which is you get out of body and it's kind of this environment, right? You're kind of in the near Earth environment. You can see things, you can remote view, you can do that kind of stuff because you're in an environment that is parallel to this physical reality. Well, why do people first get out of body? But they're lying there in their bed, you know, and they're trying to, you know, raise their out-of-body arm. They're trying to roll out. They're trying to do all this stuff to get out of their body. You see how wrong that is? You're not in your body. Don't make it body-centered. Doesn't have anything to do with your body. You don't have to get out of your body. You're already out of your body. Your consciousness. You see, what you need to do is get into your consciousness. So people, because they think their consciousness is in their body, and their body is really who they are, whether they think that intellectually or not, that's at the cultural level. Then when they get out of their body, what's the first thing they're going to have to see? Their room. Where their bed is, right? Their bedroom, their body. Of course that's what they'd have to see first, because they just got out of their body. So that places them in their bedroom or wherever it is they are. You know, whether if they're sitting in a chair in a living room, what they're going to see is wherever their body is. Yeah. Well, that's just because they have the belief that they're getting out of their body, and that's then their intent says, okay, I'm getting out of my body. I want to see this reality from my out of the body state, which is obviously right, 2-3 feet away from my body. So then they go up to the database and they get the data about their bedroom. Well, that's an exciting trip, isn't it? I get to see my bedroom. Wow, I've really been out there exploring, But that's because they believe that they're getting out of their body. They're body-centered. You're not. Instead, it should be called an OOME. What you're doing is getting out of your mind. But out of your mind has other connotations that we don't want to associate with what it is we're talking about. So unfortunately, others have already laid claim to that phrase of out of your mind, and we can't use it now because they did. But basically what you're doing is you're just focusing your intent to a different data stream. That's all you're doing. You're just consciousness. And now instead of doing the sensory perception thing and here in this virtual reality, you're just taking your consciousness and opening it up to a different reality frame. You don't have to get out of your body. The body's irrelevant. The body's just virtual. The brain's just virtual. All of that's data, you see. But because we believe it, we have to roll out of our body because somehow we're trapped in here, right? We're trapped. Our out of the body's trapped in this flesh somehow. We got to roll it out. Okay, well, why does anybody think that it was in our body in the first place? Because that's our cultural beliefs, right? That's a belief. We start with that belief. Because, we're us. This body, this is us, and if there's anything else of us, then it's got to be in here. So you see, that's not a good direction to come from. So you're already starting to make your out-of-the-body process difficult by believing that it has something to do with your body. There's nothing to do with your body at all. You don't have to roll out. Rolling out, raising that, you have all these techniques, right? You roll out, you raise this, you look at this non-physical arm, it raises up, you look at it and you go, oh damn, that's my physical arm, put it back. That didn't work right. We have all these techniques that we use. They're just tools. They're tools to help you focus your intent. And see, people get hung up on the tool. If they can't first see that invisible, wavy, ghost-like arm come up, then they're not doing it right. That's because they're body-centered. You see, they're trapped. If they can't, when they get out, look back and see their body sleeping, then they're not doing it right. They must be doing something else. So I just must be imagining this because I didn't see my body first and, whatever. Because that's the way it's written in this book. That's the way they do it. And if I don't do it like that, you see, what you're doing is trying to have somebody else's experience. You're trying to use somebody else's tools. Somebody else had this tool that they could switch their intent in their data stream if they just imagined that they rolled out, see? And that tool worked for them. Great, so it was a good metaphor for them. It was a good ritual for them. They resonated with that, and that's how they get out of body, and they write that in the book, and from then on, everybody's going like this trying to get out of body. You see, it's just their tool. Get your own tool. You don't have to get out of body and end up in your bedroom, you see. Your consciousness is not located in your bedroom or in your body. So those are some things. Okay, what can you do when you get in this state? There's lucid dreams, and a lot of times, lucid dreams, night dreams, day dreams, all sorts of dreams. A lot of times people say, well, what's the difference between an out-of-body and a lucid dream? Well, there really is no difference other than your beliefs and how you approached the process you used to get your data stream changed from this physical reality to some other reality. It's like, what tool are you using and how do you apply that tool? That's the difference. There really isn't any difference, you see? So a lucid dream, you go to sleep first, you get in a dream and you go, oh, I'm dreaming. You become aware, you become lucid that you're dreaming, and after that you take charge of it. And at the being level you can say, well, now that I know I'm dreaming, I'd like to go do something, go somewhere, explore, heal somebody, go remote view, get some data, Talk to someone, ask some questions. So now you can, that's kind of your launching place, right? Well, if you're doing the outer body, then you don't go to sleep first. You just get into that state to where you take control and you're out there. It's the same thing, except when you do it from the dream world, you have the beliefs that now you're in the dream world, so then those beliefs color what you see and what you can do, because now you're doing this dream thing, and if you're in the other world, then you're out of body, and it's just all your beliefs. It's your expectations define your limitations. If you expect that it's going to be like this, that's what you get, because that's what your intent. Your intent is the thing that tells you where you go, what you do, and how you do it. And if that intent has a belief and an expectation is just a belief, then there's your limitation. That's what you'll do, and you won't do any more than that, because you have a belief that that's the way it is. You'll have a belief that you have to see that ghost arm come up, or you're not doing it right. You can't get out, and people will try that, and they say, it just doesn't work for me, I can't do it. Well, that's because they're trying to have somebody else's experience and use somebody else's tools. It doesn't work well for them. Okay. Precognitive dreams, that's just switching that consciousness into the probable future database. Just like the historical database, it's a place you can go. Remote viewing, that's just collecting data out of that database. And you can collect that data from the probable future, historical past, or the non-historical past, the non-actualized data. Matter of fact, some of the experiments they're doing now in remote viewing is they tell a remote viewer, all right, go remote view the target. And the remote viewer goes off, and he comes back and he draws a picture of what he sees at his target. But you know what? They haven't even selected the target yet. Now, after he comes back and gives his result, then they go in and take a random number generator to generate a number between, let's say, 1 and 200, and if it gets number 56, they pull out envelope number 56, and that's his target. And this is a week later after he's already done it, and it matches. Okay. It's a probabilistic statistical reality. That's the way it works. It's not a problem. There was a probable future, a probable reality. And you're able to do those sort of things. It's just like, you burn the envelopes that have the detection data in it, and what happens? You get a diffraction pattern. You don't burn the envelopes, and then you get just 2 spots of light. But hey, all the data was taken at the same time. What was on that screen should have all be the same. Now we're changing it in the future. That's the way our reality works. It's the same way. So you can remote view anywhere. People have the idea that remote viewing is only going to a place and looking around, because that's kind of what most people talk about. But remote viewing can be anything. You can remote view cells in somebody's body. You can remote view into the future probable. You can remote view into historical things, present things. So you don't have to just go look at someplace on this planet. Remote viewing can be anything. It's just a technique to focus your intent on the data in the database. The data you get is the data that you intend to get, and you get it in the form you want. So if you say, well, the data I intend to get is somewhere on the surface of this earth, and I want it in the form of a picture, okay? And I want to go to the place that has the coordinates in this envelope. All right, now that's your intent. Well, that's the data you get, because that's your intent. You see? Now the remote viewing protocol typically now is like triple blind. They take a bunch of targets, they put them in envelopes. The envelopes are all unmarked. They mix up the envelopes. Nobody knows what's in what envelope. They pick out an envelope one day, and they walk into the room, and the remote viewer's lying down there in a bed or on a couch or sitting on a chair or whatever. If he's like me, he's standing on one foot in the corner, right? He's doing something, and anyway, he's going to remote view, and the guy walks in with the envelope, and nobody opens the envelope. The guy who's instructing the remote viewer doesn't open the envelope and read off the coordinates like I did to you, yesterday. You just hold the envelope, and it's closed, and they say, here's your target, go. Okay, give him no information. Why do they give him no information? Because he's better if you give him no information. If you give him information, he doesn't do it as well. Because if you give him information, his intellect's going, trying to figure it out, trying to judge it. If you give him nothing to go on, then even if his intellect doesn't sit down and shut up. It's got no data. You see, it's got no information to crank on. So you actually do better. So you can get better results that way. So that's typically the way remote viewing is done. And then later he does his thing, and then they open the envelope, and then they look at the coordinates, and then they find out where it was, and then they see if it matches. You see? So the less data you have sometimes, the better. Or the remote viewing can be anything. It's just another technique for accessing the database. So you can go into a meditation state, you can get into that point consciousness, and then you can go access the database. Query it with your intent. Find out what you want to find out, go where you want to go, see what you want to see, whatever. You just access the database. Now, if you want to call that a lucid dream, you want to call that an out-of-body experience, you want to call that remote viewing, it really doesn't make much difference. You're just accessing the database. When you look at somebody and you look at their aura and you see that, you can look at their spiritual aura, see their level of spiritual attainment. You can look at their emotional aura. You can see, their emotional state at the time. You can look at their health aura. All these things is different specifications for your intent. I intend to see the health data. I intend to see the spiritual data. I intend to see the emotional data. You can intend pretty much anything you want, and you get it. Okay, so you do that intent, you get the data, and the way that your output format for that data is an image. And because you're talking about Susie, then you see this nice little image about Susie and the colors and all that sort of thing, but you don't have to be seeing that around Susie. You could see it, you can just see the image. It doesn't have to be an egg shaped around a person. It could be a square, whatever it is you want. But because we believe that it has to do with Susie and it's her aura and it belongs to her, that it's somehow attached to her body, right? So because everything, we always start with the body because to us the body is the key thing. So that aura then has to be attached to the body. So if you're going to see it, you have to look at the body. And then you find out that, well, you don't really have to look at the body. You can look at somebody in a photograph and you can see their aura right there in a photograph, right? Well, it must not be attached to the body then, unless it's also attached to the photograph. And then you go, oh, it must be attached to the photograph. I don't want anybody to ever take a photograph of me because then they're capturing some of my energy, right? That was a belief. Some people didn't want to have their photographs taken. Well, you see how you get into mistaken thoughts because you don't really understand how reality works, and it's easy to do that. So yes, you can look at a photograph and you can see an aura, but you don't need to look at a photograph either. You can just think of that person, and you can have it displayed any way you want. You're just accessing data. That aura doesn't belong to that body. The aura is just data. It's information about that person. You can display it any way you want. Now, I think some of the younger people that I've talked to, because they are so into their computer games and whatever, instead of seeing things on bodies or seeing things on, whatever, they see things on monitors. They tend to bring up the image of a monitor, and everything they see is an image rendered on a monitor, on a screen, because that's how they see the world, is on a monitor for the most part. That's natural. That's more natural to them. That's a metaphor for them that works. 100 years ago, that wouldn't have worked. It would not made any sense. Okay, a low entropy consciousness can easily access all of the above with little effort, but none of it is necessary to evolve the quality of your consciousness. Okay, I keep making that point because some people feel like they failed if they can't do these things. These things are extracurricular activities. The main thing is lowering your entropy, becoming love, becoming spiritual growth. That's where we're going here. Now, what about drugs? I get that a lot. Psychotropic drugs, can't they help? Isn't that a good technology? Lots of native people use psychotropic drugs. Psychotropic drugs are also training wheels, okay? And they're very dangerous training wheels. Unless you are in a very supportive environment and unless you really know what you're doing, unless you have some skill and lots of information and a very, tight protocol on what you're trying to accomplish and so on. Unless you've got structure. And if you go to, indigenous people that's part of their culture, they have all that structure and that support. That's all there. That's part of their, they're not all just taking trips for fun. Let's do some acid tonight because we're bored. They have a lot of structure. It has meaning. It has significance. It has things to do and not to do. It's all built up like that. And unless you have all that, you are very likely, outside of that context, you're very likely to find that it's a much bigger problem than it is a help. And the reason is that it doesn't a drug cannot help you become love. You see, a drug can only help give you an experience. Now, what's the value of the experience? Well, if this experience helps you become love, then it's a valuable experience. If it doesn't, if it's just an experience, well, it's just an experience. You might as well go turn on the TV. That's an experience too, right? Watch a movie. It's just an experience, then it may be entertaining, it may be exciting, it may be a big gee whiz, but probably the only thing that I know of that drugs are really good for outside of the context of something that's more structured, because then that has special context, and within that structure, but then that context itself is a trap, right? Because now you're trapped in that context, just like you're trapped with that hemisync. You're trapped in a context, because once you have this context that we take this drug and it's the god of peyote or something, and we're going to do this, and we're going to smoke this, and then these things will happen, and then the elders will come, and you have all this thing. Well, then this is a very defined context of what's going to happen, how it's going to happen, and then you go into that, and it happens that way because that's your expectation, and then you can get certain things out of that. So that's what I mean. If it's really well defined like that, then that'll all work, but then you're stuck in that context, right? We're talking about being a citizen of the larger reality, that you go where you want, when you want, do the things you want, collect the data as you want, interact as you want, and it's not just this limited context. There is no limitations. The context is you're a free agent to do experiments and go and experience anything you want, however you want. You see, in the larger reality frame, connect to those databases. You're there to grow. You're there to grow up. So the drugs have perhaps one good feature to them that a lot of people claim has been very helpful to them, and that is if they initially convince you that reality is bigger than the physical. In other words, I've run into any number of people that said, I took some drugs once, and wow, suddenly I was at one with the universe, and this and that, and I had all these mystical, it was this great experience, and that was it. They maybe took it maybe once more or something, but then that was it. They let it go, but they started a pursuit of personal growth and spiritual growth that got them started on a path of being interested. In other words, that was the eye-opener. Well, a lot of people have a paranormal experience that's the same way, right? Something really amazing happens to them that shows them that reality is bigger than just this. You don't have to take a drug, to get that. Most people get it other ways. We get nudged all the time. We talk about synchronicity and all sorts of other things. They're nudging us to wake us up, a little slap in the face, a little cold water, saying, look, reality's bigger than just this. There's something more to it than just this physical stuff. It's got another dimension. There's this spiritual dimension. There's this other dimension. And they may not think of it in consciousness, but it's that eye-opener. It's the cold water in the face. Well, a drug can do that to you. A drug can be the cold water in the face that says, oh, reality is bigger. But then if you quit there with the drug and go on and pursue a bigger reality, I think you're a winner. If you go on then and pursue that larger reality through the drug, I think you're probably going to be a loser, because all that will do is drive you into an experience. Well, okay, you can have these great experiences, great technicolor, it's like the graphics are wonderful, but the significance is lost. And that drug then can make it more difficult for you. If you take drugs, if you continue to take those drugs, it tends to make it more difficult for you to do it without them. So in other words, now it would have taken you maybe a year to get to this place. If you have been taking a lot of drugs, it may take you 2 years to get to that place, because you've got a lot of expectation, you got belief, you got, I don't know, the people I have known, this is more of a empirical observation. Those who take drugs have a harder time getting there without the drugs. So I think drugs on the whole are a big negative. I say stay away from them. Don't try to get to the larger reality through drugs. If it's an eye-opener for you, fine. If it's a very highly structured process within a button-down context, well, if that's your culture, you know, go through it. It's not that there's anything morally wrong with it. It's just, it's whether or not it's effective. You know, what do you get out of it? What do you gain from it? And if you take drugs, I guarantee you a drug will not turn you into a love being. You have to do that work. And if you're spaced out and your mind is zinging, that's not spiritual growth. That's just an experience. Okay? So don't confuse having an experience in the larger reality with growing up. They're not the same thing. They're very different. All right, fear, belief, and inexperience are the primary constraints. I think we've already talked about some of this. The non-physical reality is experienced through your consciousness, not through your senses. But our interpretation is in terms of our senses. Right? So you get into the larger reality and you see, hear, smell, touch, all sensory things. Well, obviously, it's your consciousness that's experiencing this. How does it end up in, you know, see, hear, touch, and smell? It ends up that way because that's how we interpret everything. We interpret the data in terms of our experience. Our experience here is see, touch, hear, you know, smell, taste. That's our experience. So we interpret it in terms of our experience. So we don't actually have senses there. We don't see. When we communicate in the larger reality, we communicate telepathically. So you can communicate with anyone because you're communicating in terms of thoughts. But let me give you a little idea about what it is to communicate telepathically. When you communicate telepathically, you communicate in paragraphs. You communicate in chapters. You communicate in big chunks of information. When you communicate here, you communicate with linear strings of symbols, right? Words, strings of words together communicate. That's not how you communicate telepathically. A telepathic communication is a whole paragraph comes at once. A whole set of concepts, an understanding, a knowing just comes. Okay, telepathy has its own way of communicating with you. Think of you walk into a room, and you can look at that room in one of two different ways. You can look at it in an objective way, or you can look at it in a subjective way. Okay, now telepathic communications, of course, are subjective. But let's just look at this room. Now, if somebody were to walk in this room and describe it objectively, what would they do? They'd say, well, here's the dimensions. It's this tall, high ceilings, the number of lights, the color of the rug, you know, the acoustic panels on the wall. You know, they basically tell you about all the stuff, right? They describe the stuff in the room. That's what this room would be. But if somebody comes in and describes this room subjectively, what do? They describe its function, its ambience, what goes on here, what has gone on here in the past, and you know, what it's for. So it's that sort of thing. You get a feel for it. It has its own character, its own sense. And that's the subjective description of this room. Okay, now when you communicate telepathically, it's more like the subjective description of the room. In the larger reality, interacting is more about the ambience, the message, kind of the big picture, the function, the meaning. It's not about the stuff. It's not about the color of the rug, you know, the number of benches, you know, how many light bulbs and what wattage. You know, it's not about physical detail. It's about content. It's about meaning. It's about significance. It's about feel. It's about friendliness, about love, it's about fear. It's about those kinds of things, all subjective kind of feeling sorts of things. That's how you communicate telepathically. You get information, but the information isn't objective linear information for the most part. Now, sometimes it is. You can get objective information there too, but I'm saying that the general characteristic of a telepathic communication is that you get the information without a lot of descriptive stuff, data. Okay, in the larger reality, it's mostly about relationship, it's about people, it's about interaction, it's about things affecting things. It's not about stuff. It's not about the set. You see, here in this physical reality, it's, to a large extent, our life is about the stuff. You know, it's the environment. It's the objects. Now, let's say you do a remote view, and you've told a skeptic that you can remote view, and you're outside of this room, and you and the skeptic are out there, and you say, well, I'm going to go into this room just with my mind, and I'm going to remote view, and I'm going to come out and describe it to you. Well, you'd come into this room, and you'd look around, and you go out and describe it. And how would you describe it? You'd describe it subjectively. You'd describe it, well, there was this space. It's a space for people to meet and get together. It's a learning space. It's a space where, you know, information is passed back and forth. It's a comfortable space. It's this, it's that. It's a little cold. It's a little this, you know, it's not real warm space. And you describe the space that way because that's the kind of information you're most likely to get. Now, you may want to get the detail, and you'd look around and you'd say, well, it has these long, you know, I see these kind of benchy things in it, and it's got walls and this and that. Well, of course, yeah, a room's got walls, right? Now, you just said something miraculous. It really took a remote viewer to say that. And you give them just a little bit of the detail, but you might even say, and there's a clock on the back wall. You might say a few things, but, you know, the skeptic says, well, okay, you know, you said it had walls, had a clock on the back wall, you know, you got that right, you know, and it had, you know, more than 15 of these bench type table things, and okay, but you know, what was the color of the rug? Was there a stain on the rug right up in the front? What sort of acoustic tile was in there? What color was it? You see, and you may not have gotten any of that data. Well, as far as the skeptic goes, you weren't here, because if you were here, you'd be able to say, you know, you could come in here with a ruler and you could measure it and say exactly what the dimensions are. You could say, oh yeah, there was a stain there, and you know, had smears, chalk smears on the blackboard, and you describe all this detail of the stuff. Because in our reality, the stuff is what matters. You see, it's the stuff is what's objective. And we measure a reality's credibility by its objective description. The objective description is a description of the stuff. A detailed description of the stuff. Well, in fact, the details of the stuff really don't matter much, right? Here we are having this conversation, we're interacting, you know, I'm telling you things, you're taking in some data, you know, we're learning, we're doing this kind of stuff. And what do the details of the stuff mean to us? Nothing, right? As long as the seat isn't too uncomfortable, you know, we forget all about the stuff. Well, that's the way it is mostly in the larger reality. When you interact out there, yes, you'll interact, there'll be stuff, there'll be settings, you know, there'll be other things, but for the most part, those things are not in high-res detail. Most of the time, the interaction is about the content, the meaning, the interaction. What does it matter? You know, what do you get? What do you learn? It's content trading. It's not details about the setting. There is no setting. This is just consciousness exchanging data. To exchange the data and meaning, you don't have to derive a setting, and the walls don't have to have a certain color or a particular kind of acoustic tile, you see. None of that's important, just like it isn't important to us, so you don't get it. So that's why it's hard to convince the skeptic, see, because the only thing that will convince him that you've been in that room, or that you are now in that room seeing it and describing it, is a very detailed description of the stuff, which is irrelevant. See the difference? So when you come back from that, you know, if you want to go out and collect data, sometimes that's a little frustrating because most of the data you get isn't objective kind of data. It's all subjective. It's information. You see, and information is not physical. It's not objective. So that's the way telepathy works. You get the sense of things, not the detailed description of things. You talk to an entity, you don't see that the buttons on his jacket are made out of ivory. You know, those kinds of things. He doesn't even have a jacket. You know, he doesn't have buttons. It doesn't matter. You just make kind of a form there because you need a form to be a metaphor for a being. See what I mean? Don't expect, I guess what I'm saying, don't expect when you get to this larger reality and you look around for it to be just like this. You see, it's not going to be just like this. You're not going to have all this stuff and all this objective detail in your picture. So going to the larger reality is not like going to Connecticut or going home. It's not like this at all. It's a data. It's a subjective world. Okay, fear, belief, and inexperience are the primary constraints to keep you from experiencing what is actually there. Now, they won't restrict you from experiencing anything at all, but from experiencing what is maybe intended by the larger consciousness experience. Now, we talked about fear and belief, you understand that. What about inexperience? Well, we have to interpret these metaphors, right? We get data, we interpret that data. You get better and better at interpreting the data the more experience you have. The more you go there, the more experience, the more experiments you do, if you will, the better you can do that interpretation. Initially, if you have fears, if you have beliefs, you tend to interpret everything in terms of your fears and your beliefs and your knowledge and your experience. Everything is interpreted in terms of what you have. Okay, so first thing, you need to get rid of the fears and beliefs because then that'll make your interpretations more accurate. Secondly, you need a lot of experience in how to interpret because with experience, you gain familiarity and you can start to share metaphors. See, the only reason that we can communicate so well is we can use the same metaphors. People from another culture, a drastically different culture than this, would have a hard time communicating even if the translation in language was perfect because our metaphors wouldn't make sense to them. Okay, so you have to kind of broaden the generality of your metaphors a little and not just translate into narrow little metaphors out of your experience, and that just takes time to do it. What you find in the non-physical. Everything is subjective. Only consistent, well-planned probing and statistical analysis of the results of that probing, that is, careful, considered experience, can give you a sense of what the objective reality is behind the data. Mostly, non-physical experience is relationship-centered, about interaction with others, as opposed to observing the set. Physical realities have sets, stage, and props, while non-physical reality mostly just has actors and ambience. Okay, it's an information trade. The more you probe, explore, make connections, and gain understanding, the greater and more capable that personal experiential database becomes in its ability to interpret non-physical experience with a minimum of distortion. Again, take the long view. It should be clear why skepticism is so critical, why you must learn to live with uncertainty, and why just zipping around experiencing whatever is not very productive compared to a systematic probing and collecting of data in order to assess what is fundamental outside of you from what is not outside of you. For instance, the Hindus see 7 very specific chakras, while the Zen Buddhist and shaman don't. Okay, now why is that? Do the Hindus know something that everybody else doesn't? No. Are they more spiritual and therefore have seen things that other people don't see? No. Chakras are just metaphors. And metaphors are good. Metaphors we use to help us structure the data. All of our rituals, our meditation rituals, or other things, they're metaphors. They're metaphors that mean something special to us. They help us focus our attention. They help us connect in ways that would be difficult for us otherwise. Okay, so what are the chakras? Well, people got a lot of data about the larger consciousness system and how it affected us. And when you have that data and you want to tell it to somebody else, well, what you do is you gather things that seem to go together. You make a structure. You make a model. Remember we talked about yesterday a slide called a model? Everybody makes models of things. Everything we talk about is models. Remember we said an electron is really a model for an effect. Don't believe in electrons. They're just models of an effect. Okay? So you make a model, and their model was that you had, you know, the things that affected you. You know, this is how your interaction with the larger reality and how it affects you and your growth spiritually. Well, then they broke these down into 7 centers, and they placed them at various places in the body, right? Because of course the body is what's important, and that's where we all start. You know, it's the body. You know, that's the main thing. You gotta start with the body. So you got one down here at the root chakra, and that has to do with sex and fundamental stuff. And then you have the one up here at the top of the head. Of course, the brain lives in that little house in your head. I mean, there's consciousness lives in that little house in your head. So you have the one up here at your head, and then you have the one at your heart. And that, you know, so they do all these things because that's just a way of describing the data. You're taking the data, you're clumping it into various things that seem to go together, then you're putting it in a system that you can explain and you can talk about. So what they've done is they've taken this big basket full of data, and they've created a model out of it that helps people deal with that data, that helps people understand it, that helps people use it. Okay, so when I say they're just metaphors, don't let the just indicate that means they're worthless or they're not important or they're fake. They're just metaphors, but we need metaphors or we can't communicate with each other. Language is nothing but symbol and metaphor. That's it. It's all that, that's all spoken language is. Symbol and metaphor. It's all written languages. Symbol and metaphor. So they make up a model, and then the model is a way of looking at reality. And people can use the model in order to deal with those facts of reality. So that's why, the Hindus ended up with this model that had chakras, and other people didn't because they had other models. Okay, and of course, once you have these models, just like in the scientific things, you start to believe that electrons actually exist. And they're not just effects that you can measure, and they're consistent effects. And then we give them names. And that name is just a symbol, right? That name's a metaphor. That name's a model. It's an electron. We're talking about an effect, not about a thing. But once we give it a name, now it's a little thing, right? Now it's this little thing, and it's just an effect. So, beams of intense white light. The white light we used to heal in our last exercise, it's just a metaphor. Because we believe that if you're going to affect something, you have to do something. It's not necessary, it's a metaphor. And I had someone come to me over the last break, and they talked about energy. He said, I feel energy. Well, I feel energy too. Most of us kind of feel energy. And if you're good at that, if you're very sensitive at feeling energy, you can feel the energy of others, you can feel the energy of events, you can feel the energy of places. All of these things, you can connect with them, and you feel it. Or if you're visual, you see it. You can see connections between things. You see little strings of light that connect all the people and everything, and that's your visual metaphor. Or you can have a feeling metaphor. You can have an emotional metaphor. And the question was, what is this energy? And when I first said, well, energy is just a metaphor, I could see, but I feel this energy. I mean, it's there, it's real. And, well, sure it is, but that's your metaphor to describe what is there and what's real. And energy, the metaphor of energy is your ability to change something, to affect something, to interact. That's energy. And that's the way, science uses energy as well. Energy allows an interaction. So if I'm going to go out and heal something, I'm going to go out and affect you, then I'm giving you energy. I'm sending energy ray because I'm having an effect. So energy is a metaphor for having an effect. It's not that I'm really sending you anything. That's just our habit of speech. I'm not really sending you energy. I see it that way. I may visualize it that way because that's a tool for help focusing my intent. But that's not what's happening. I'm modifying the data. I'm changing the data in the data stream. I'm playing with the probabilities, you see. But because I can have an effect, I call that energy. Energy is just a metaphor. Light is just a metaphor. Electrons are just a metaphor. Okay, there are metaphors for an effect that you have. So we send energy to people, and it's a good metaphor. I use it all the time. You know, it's not like you should avoid metaphors, but you have to see it for what it is. It's the connectedness that you often see and that you feel. It's the effect that you're having. Okay, we're all data, and we have the ability to manipulate that data. We can change things with that data. We can send energy to people, and they get it. They feel it. It makes them feel better. Or if we don't like them, maybe we send negative energy. It makes them feel worse. But in any case, we do have an effect, so we call it energy. We're changing the data. We're sharing information. That's what we're doing. So when you're a consciousness, you can move about in consciousness. There's no space in consciousness. When you're out of body, you don't have to fly to get someplace. If people out of body fly, it's because they have a belief that you have to move in order to get someplace. It's the same reason people having NDEs, near-death experiences, have to go through tunnels. They have to go through a tunnel because they're going from where they are to someplace else. And you don't get a sense of moving. You don't get a sense of progression unless you have this idea of moving. So there's this tunnel, and you walk through the tunnel, and that's how you get from A to B. You obviously don't really have to do that. Those are just visualizations, interpretations that we make because they fit our beliefs. You don't have to go anywhere to get someplace. All you have to do is shift your intent. You're there. You see, it's just data. So if you want to go out of body and be in your room because you're coming out of your body, therefore you're in your room, then you have that intent. But if you want to end up in some other world, some other reality frame, some other part of the universe, or in some other universe, all you have to do is put your intent there, switch into that data stream, and you're there. No travel necessary. So you could think that you teleport, but that's not really right either, because teleport has this sense of you're moving something from here to there. You're not really moving anything. You're just connecting to a different data stream. You're just letting your awareness flow to a different information set in the larger consciousness system. Okay, that's all that's going on. So you can start your out of body and immediately be on, anywhere you want. So you can call it teleport because it's like instantly disappearing from here and ending up there, but it's not really moving stuff. Again, it's information. In any reality frame, one must strive to become aware of one's abilities and one's limitations and discover the operational causality of the immediate environment. If you have that attitude, then you will learn and you'll become more able to get around and to understand what you're doing. Okay, one must strive to become aware of one's abilities and one's limitations and discover the operational causality of the immediate environment. How does it work? Okay, and that's if you're trying now to understand the larger reality. If you're not trying to understand the larger reality, all you're trying to do is get the information, share, heal, help, learn, grow. If you're just making the connection, then you don't need to be too aware of your limitations or anything else. You do what you do, and it's fine. But for those of you that want to explore, you want to do your own research, you want to understand it, for all you left brain people out there that, have to approach everything that way, then you can approach it that way. Not necessary, but it's available. I give this little metaphor to people because they say that they get into the larger reality system and then they don't know what to do, and they're confused and they're lost and they have no sense of reference, and that's because the only sense of reference they have is here in this physical reality, and they want it to be like the physical reality because that's all they know, but it doesn't work like that, so they just get confused and don't know what to do. And the little metaphor that I had for it, that is very much like if you took a person that was born blind and say in a little cabin in Appalachia, had never been more than a couple of 100 feet from his cabin, and you put a big, you scooped him up one night, put him in a sack and then flew him to New York and dumped him out at Times Square. Okay, that's sort of the way it is when you get into the larger reality. Suddenly you're just in a different world with different physics and different way it works, and if you try to keep applying the same things it doesn't work for you. Okay, it's that sort of a thing. And how do you explore a reality that's foreign to you, that you don't really know. Because see, I can't tell you about it because your own interpretations are going to be your personal interpretations, right? So I can't say, oh, when you get here, here's what you'll see, and here's the landmarks and all this kind of stuff, because that won't work because this is personal. You're going to interpret it your own way. Those are my landmarks, not your landmarks. So nobody can really tell you because you're going to create it out of your own interpretations anyhow, from the data that you get. So what do? Same as any explorer does anywhere if you want to explore. When you get to a foreign place and you don't know how it works, you kind of feel around, look around, and maybe take 1 or 2 steps, and then you come back and kind of assess the difference between there and here, and you do that a few times until you're familiar, and then you take those few steps, and then maybe you take a few more steps, and then you come back and kind of assess the difference between here and there and the next place. So in other words, you start building a map, right? Don't expect to get into the larger reality and it's like, it's like going to the next city. It's not like that. It's not like just a different physical experience. You have to get there and you have to explore. You have to learn through experience. So you go a little bit, you come back, you go a little bit, you come back, you explore. It has to be methodical. You have to see what you see, what's there, what does it affect, and of course, what's the question you always ask? What's the value? What can I learn? How does this help me grow? Where's the value in this? What's important here? Don't get caught up in, gee whiz, this is neat. That's just the experience. That's not really the purpose. If that's what you get caught up in, then that's basically all you'll get. Okay, you won't get anything you're not ready for, not willing to accept. You'll just miss it. You won't see it. It won't be there. Okay, so you just have to go step by step by step until you eventually build up a map, build up an awareness, make friends, that sort of thing. Get used to it. Okay. We talked already some yesterday about guides. Let's see, I can tell you a few things we didn't talk about. Guides are also a metaphor, of course. Everything's a metaphor, right? If we're speaking about it in language, if we're describing it, then there's a couple of things that we know for sure. If we're going to talk about it, 1, it's a metaphor, and 2, it's a model. Don't confuse the models of reality with reality. Okay, so we talk about guides. Guides are our metaphor for something that communicates with us. Okay, if we're out there, and let's talk more general, not even about guides, just another being that we meet out there in this larger reality. What is a being? Well, the word being is a metaphor for something that will interact with us. If it interacts with us, it's a being. And in our mind, if it's a being, it's got a head and arms and legs, sort of looks like us. Okay, because that's our sense of an interactive being that'll trade data with us. Okay, so that's what we do it. And if we don't know exactly what that should look like, and we're used to this objective detail, then we may make that being, 7 feet tall, green skin, pointy ears, whatever. Or we may wrap it in a cloak or a robe and have a hood over it so we can't really see because we're really not interested in that much detail. But we want a symbol, we want a metaphor for the being, so we make it look a little humanoid. Or if we're more imaginative and seen a lot of sci-fi, maybe it's a talking rock, or a burning bush or something, a 3-headed giraffe or something. We can do something more creative, but most of us don't. Most of us make our beings humanoid. Or we may make our beings into animals. The being may be a lion or a wolf or a bear or some other sort of thing, as appropriate, because a lion, a wolf, and a bear and a fish or something may symbolize different things to us, particularly if those animals are symbols in our culture, have certain attributes, then we can put those connections into that form. Whatever makes sense to us is what we use. Okay, whatever works. Those are the kinds of things we use. So that's what a being is. It's our metaphor for something that will communicate to us. And we picture it in a way that makes sense to us. And this is a model. If we model it as a wolf, because that makes sense to us within our culture and within the kind of information we're getting, or if we model it as an old man with a beard, or if we model it as an indescript person in a robe with the hood up, that's us, okay? And that's our model. And we can share that model with other people. And we can say, oh, I met this really cool guy, and he's got this green robe with a red hood and so on. And that other person will go up and maybe can meet the same guy with the green robe and a red hood, because you've already given them the model. You've given them the metaphor. So they can use that metaphor, or maybe they get a different metaphor. You see, metaphors can be shared, and they're shared within cultures. They're shared within group understandings. All right. So what about this guide thing? So the guide is our personal interface with the larger consciousness system. So we have this larger consciousness system. Here we are, one of its tools for evolving, and we have an interface with it. And that interface comes in several forms. It can come in as intuition. Intuition generally is just data stream, right? That's just information. We just get the information. Okay, we call that intuition. And we can interface with it like it's a person, like it's a being. Okay, when it's a being, we not only get information, but we also get a sense of presence. We get an image of a person. Okay, it's just another way to interface. There's lots of ways you can interface with that. There's lots of models you can use to interface with the larger conscious system. But now this guide can be a consistent interface. It doesn't have to be a random interface. It's a consistent interface, which means your guide can have a personality. It can have a sense of humor. It can have a past and a history. You can talk about, where it came from, what it did, it'll do all that sort of thing, because it's just like us. It bubbles up out of the system whenever it's needed. Okay, this guide doesn't float along with you, paying attention to your every thought, your every emotion, your feeling, every intent. It's not just focused on you and keeping track of you, so when you ask, it can give you information. That would be like your slave, right? Don't say anything unless I ask. Guides are better if they only speak when they're spoken to. And it just bubbles out of the system and interacts with you, because the system is interacting with you all the time. And you can call on that particular guide, and you can think of that guide and have an intent to talk with them, and there they are, right? Doesn't take long. This bubbling up process is pretty quick. So there they are, and they'll talk with you, and they just happen to have all this information that you don't have. Well, they have access to information that you do. So they're entities, and they are progressing, and they are growing, and they are learning, and they are evolving just like you are. They're different. They're interacting with you to help you grow. It's part of your interface with the system. So they have their jobs, you have yours, but we're all basically just bubble up out of the system when it's ready for us to go to work. We get tossed into a virtual reality and given some free will, and there we go. And in the meantime, what are we? If we don't have that free will, we're not in a virtual reality. We're just data, rules, information, probabilities. We're a data set in the larger consciousness system. We don't need free will. The larger conscious system has free will. Your hand doesn't need free will. It does what you tell it, right? It's just part of you. Your toenails don't need free will. So we're just a part of it then. And then it's time to go, it's time to grow up. It's time to help lower the entropy of the system. Time to go to work, bubble up out, get into a virtual reality. You get some free will, because the virtual reality, you see, creates a condition of choice. So we get in the virtual reality. We're in here, we're interacting in this game. We got all these choices. We have free will to interact in that system. So when I go to the past reality frame and look at you and what you were doing last week and last month and 10 years ago and the life before that, you see, what do I find there? Well, I can go and have a conversation with you, and I can talk to you, and we can talk. But it's a model of you. It's you without the free will. It's the same thing you were before you got that free will and got tossed into this virtual reality. It's you, and it has all the probabilities, it interacts like you, it sounds like you, has all your memory, has all your feelings, has everything that you've accumulated to that point. That's that historical you. Now, if I go back further in time, it's that historical you that existed at that time. You see, it's just a subset of that data. So you exist in many degrees of potentiality. As Seth would say, we live in a multidimensional reality. Okay, so you exist in all these places. You exist in the future as well. There's the future you. Again, that future you is not acting, interacting, making choices. It's just the data set that describes you. It's the essence of you. Okay. And that essence of you is that future probable you. Then when it gets to the present, you interact with that data set, with your free will, you make your choices, you grow, or you de-evolve. All right. So if the larger conscious system wants to get you a message, wants to give you a nudge, it may do that in the form of intuition, it may do that in the form of a guide, it may do that in the form of a voice in your ear, a voice in your head. If it's trying to just open your mind, it may do something a little more dramatic and show you something paranormal that tries to wake you up. You have this interface going on all the time. Negative entities. People have a lot of fear about the larger consciousness system. It's like they're going into this foreign territory that's scary because something might get them there. They don't know, they're not in control. We tend to mostly be control freaks. Our objective reality pushes us to be that way, to be in control. We don't like not being in control. If we're not in control, something might get us. Something might do something to us. We want to be in control of the situation so we can prevent that from happening. You'll need to let that go. Actually, you need to let that go here as well as any other reality frame. Because the truth is you're generally not in control of anything. The only thing you really can be in control of is yourself. Most of the rest of what you think you're in control of is hallucinatory. You only think you're in control. It appears like you're in control. So let the control go. Negative entities exist because we have free will. When you have free will, you can de-evolve as well as evolve. And you can actually gain some power with that de-evolution. It's not just all disintegration, because you can supply, you can decrease your entropy through control. So if you control what you think, you can learn to meditate, even if what you're going to do with that meditation, once you get to that point consciousness, you're going to do voodoo, you're going to kill people, you're going to manipulate your boss to give you a raise. You have all these negative ideas of what you're going to do with it. You can still learn to meditate and get to that point. There's no barrier. You're just on a de-evolutionary path because of what your intent is. So you can, through control your mind, control your consciousness, control your thoughts, you can get there. But you'd rather get there through love, by being open. Open your mind, open your thoughts, open your heart, and do that in such a way that it's not full of junk. You see, it's kind of a different process. So negative entities do exist. There's cultures of negative entities that exist in the larger conscious system. And sometimes they can be pretty mean-spirited. But there are negative entities that exist in our reality too, aren't they? And we go on with life. Your probability of running into trouble and being hurt in your explorations is almost negligible. You're probably more likely to get hurt here walking through your park than you are there. You're probably more likely here to get hurt driving your car and flying in your airplane than you are exploring there. In other words, it's not a hostile place. Don't get the idea that if you get into the larger reality, it's a really hostile place. If it seems that way, it's probably because you're running into fear, or you're just being given fear tests. So you get all this scary stuff going on, but it's not. If you go there with no fear, if you have no fear and you have a good attitude, you have love in your heart, you will not likely run into trouble. Now, I won't say that it's impossible to run into trouble. It's just unlikely, very unlikely. You'll do well. It's not likely enough that you should ever worry about it. Just have no fear. It's the same here. You can't live in a closet in your house because you're afraid if you go out, something will fall out of an airplane and hit you in the head, or a car will run over you, or whatever. You can't live with all that fear. Can't do that in the larger reality either. Just let it go. Just go there. Interact. Be love. Don't be afraid. And it'll probably be just fine. Very, very low probability that you'll have anything that'll happen to you that'll be poor. Yeah, there's all sorts of things there. Some things that are parasitic, low life. Most of that stuff's attracted to you through your fear. If you're not fearful, you give that stuff almost no ability to attach to you, to connect with you. It only connects with you through your fear. Your fear makes yourself available for negative interaction. So without the fear, you're more or less untouchable, okay? It's your fear that makes it. You have to make a connection. If that data is sent to you and you don't accept it, if that data is sent to you and you don't connect with it, then you just turn it back. You know, it doesn't affect you. It's like watching that horror movie, but finding it amusing rather than finding it scary. See, that doesn't affect you. So you have to be ready to go there. If you're full of fear, you probably just should work on your fear first before you try going into these places. Okay.